Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted you could join me. I'm John McNellis. We're here today to talk about one very specific topic in the real estate developers' panoply, and that's the 1031 exchange, the benefits of the 1031 exchange versus the pros and cons. 1031 exchange being the tax-deferred trade. If you're interested, and this talk, the Panacea talk is the fifth in a series of talks. It started with a broader view on running a development company, starting, running, hopefully succeeding with a development company. If you're interested in that or in any of these specific topics, ULI has kindly posted these topics on YouTube, and you can check them out there. Or if you want, you could borrow a copy of my book from one of your friends. If you want to get your own copy, they'll be for sale at the end of the talk, or of course they're on Amazon. A bit of background, I started 35 years ago with my partners in the retail development business, developing neighborhood shopping centers. Over 35 years, we developed about a little more than 2 deals a year, a total of about 80 deals. Because we gave up having financial partners in about 1990, we had, by definition, by necessity, we had to either sell or trade about 2 out of every 3 properties in order to keep going. The sale or trade from one property would fund the next property. So I have a fair bit of experience with the topic that we're going to discuss today, the 1031 exchange. Now, for those of you who've been in business for a while, if you spent time with some of the guys in this audience, the guys who look like me, the grizzled gray veterans, the developers, sooner or later you have heard some guy swear to you that he will never even think about selling a property unless he can do a trade. Guys are so tax adverse, they think that you are simple-minded if you would consider selling a property for cash. Simple-minded, it's almost a sacrilege. And because personally I've always kind of liked breaking the odd commandment or two, I'm going to challenge that deeply held belief today. That commandment is not carved in stone. Now, before we get into that, let's just review the basics of the 1031 exchange. I think you all know this. You have to identify your trade property within 45 days of the date you sell the first property. You have to close the trade property within 180 days after that first date. And are there any accountants in the room? There must be 1 or 2. Good, that's good news. Oh, there's one. So, with the apologies to the accountants, I'm oversimplifying this a little bit. The price and the debt on the new property, the one you're trading into, has to be equal to or greater than what you sold. And also, with another nod to that one accountant in the back, I need to make you aware of one technical assumption. We're going to assume, for the purpose of this discussion today, that your basis, or actually my basis, in the properties I'm going to discuss is exactly 0. What that means is that 100% of the sale proceeds are subject to tax. That's the only technical part about this whole discussion. So that brings us to this 11th commandment and questioning it. And really the question is that simple. Is a 1031 exchange where you're selling and avoiding taxes better, or more precisely, always better than selling for cash? Or are you sometimes better off selling for cash, paying your taxes, and reinvesting the net proceeds? And the answer, damn, it's always the same with complicated questions. The answer is never simple. The answer in this case, like in so many other cases, it depends. What does it depend on? I'm sure everybody in this room knows what it depends on for the most part. It depends on the quality of the property you're trading into. Now, let's just focus on that for a second. I'm a developer. I've got a number of friends here in the audience who are developers. Developers, when they look for property, are looking for what? Value-add deals, which necessarily, by definition, entail a lot of risk. it's impossible, I think, to find a value-add deal that is risk-free. So here's the problem. Back to that 45-day, 180-day paradigm. It's possible, and in fact, it comes up often enough. It's possible to find trade properties, development deals within that 45-day period. You can find them. Finding them isn't the hard part. The hard part is solving or swallowing all the risk within the ensuing 135 days. Remember, it's a total of 180. Very hard to identify and vet a development deal in 180 days. So that's one problem. And even if you are interested in buying nothing other than finished real estate, 100% leased, it's leased for 20 years, it's totally paved, there are no risk, you can find those easily enough in 45 days, and you can close on those easily enough in that 180 days. But if you go back and ask those same grizzled veterans of real estate about their experience, particularly if you pump them with a couple of beers so that they loosen up a little bit, and then you ask them, gee, Graybeard, what's the worst deal you've ever done? Chances are, often as not, that it started with a rushed 1031 exchange. But for our purposes today, it also depends on something, and this is, I'm talking really to the younger members of the audience, it depends on the breadth of your financial perspective, whether this is a good idea or not. It depends on what you see as your financial alternatives. If you're a developer starting out and you've got a few deals going, and if your financial statement is nothing but real estate and pocket change for pizza, which is essentially, I'll admit this, that was my financial statement until I was about 50, zero liquidity. If that's your statement, if that's all you've got, then trading is as important to your success rather than selling. Trading is as important to your success as, say, a booster rocket is to the space shuttle. No trade, no liftoff. Again, if your only alternative is to trade into even a marginally located asset, a second-tier asset, say, and I'm not going to pick on Walgreens, but I'm going to pick on Walgreens. Walgreens is famous, you may know, for having leases that go into infinity and beyond, 50, 75 years, and they're flat that whole time. And they're also famous for trading at extremely low cap rates, 5, 6%. You're still better as a young developer trading into one of these deals that goes out forever than you are selling your property, paying the capital gains tax. Capital gains, remember, is 20% for federal, 0 in certain states, Texas, Nevada, up to 13 in tax-ravaged California. But if you say 25, we're going to assume 25% for total taxes. If that's your only alternative, buy that Walgreens versus pay your 25% in taxes and then put the money in the bank earning 0, of course you're going to trade. But what I'm here to tell you today, there's another alternative. And what better way to expose that alternative than to tell you about a bad trade that we made. There's a town in California, in northernmost California, called Weed. It has nothing to do with an agricultural product, and it didn't recently change its name. It's been called Weed forever. It's in northernmost California. I don't know if you can see that. It's on Highway 5, which is the main north-south arterial of California. And its claim to fame is Mount Shasta, truly a magnificent mountain. It's one of the tallest peaks in California. It's over 14,000 feet tall. That white cone is, of course, Mount Shasta. So the astute among you looking at this might say, John, why did you buy 5 acres of dirt in a town that is nothing but dirt? And the answer is, Walmart was then, has been for 20 years, 25 years, one of our best tenant relationships. In 2007, when we traded into this property, just to give you a perspective for some of you, 2007 was a lot like 2018. 2007, the party was roaring, and prices were at an all-time high. Walmart said, hey, John, we're going to buy the 30 acres next to this 5. We're going to build a super center. It'd be nice if you came out and built the shops. So we said, sure, sounds like a good idea. What had happened was, the recession started about 2 hours after we closed on this property. I'm not kidding. And suddenly, oh my God. And then Walmart says, well, sorry, understandably, Walmart took a walk on the 30 acres, and we own this 5 acres of dirt. And I swear, for 9 years, this piece did not have a pulse. Didn't have a pulse. The only thing we did 2 things with this property for 9 years. We spent $150 and had somebody paint a sign, it was by the freeway, you've seen 1,000 of them, it says, for sale, for lease, we'll give it away, for a case of beer. And we didn't get any calls on that sign. The other thing that we did that was kind of smart, just for good developer practice, on our financial statements, we took, and I think I pointed it out, we paid $1.36 million for this dirt. Within a couple years, we wrote that dirt down to 0 on our financial statements. Didn't mean anything, but it impressed our accountants, and it also impressed our banker, with our financial discipline. And it also got us used to the idea early on, the boiling frog thing. We got used to the fact that we'd lost all that money. But it really wasn't a bad piece of property. It was just caught in timing. 2016, fast forward then 9 years, we were lucky. Along came a first-rate discount grocery store chain, grocery outlet, and we made a deal with them, and this is how the numbers looked. We had paid for a deal for a build-to-suit supermarket. We paid it $1.36 million for this property. Now, pay attention to this. That second line item, the $2.7 million, that's a land carry at 10%. Now, because we've been around for a while, we had paid cash for the property. We did not have a loan, did not have a financial partner. But if you as a young developer had done this deal, chances are you would have had both. For us, this $2.7 million was a theoretical journal entry, but it's also good financial discipline. For you, starting out, this would be a real number. So our all-in cost, including the $4 million on the land, and then the $3.4 million, and that's the hard cost of construction, the architecture, engineering, bank fees, leasing commissions, and everything, our all-in cost was just under $7.5 million. And that's without a dime to us. So we're into this deal from 2007 to 2018, 11 years, no money. To us, it's all going out the other way. This, folks, is the grocery outlet store on its happiest day. It's probably the grand opening day. 2 things to notice. That little mountain in the back, that's a matter of perspective. That is actually Mount Shasta, 14,000 feet tall in its glory, but somewhat obscured by this magnificent grocery outlet. And also notice we have the grand opening banners still up. This picture was taken, I think, right after the mayor cut the ribbon, and we put this thing on the market right away. How did that turn out? It turned out pretty good, all things being equal. 5.5 cap for a single tenant market in a, let's be kind and call it a secondary market. That's a very good price. But notice, with that land carry, had we actually borrowed money, had we had a financial partner, in other words, had we been in your shoes, we would have lost almost $1.9 million. Had a young developer done this deal, it would have been a terrible trade. Had we done it, we did do it. There's a reason they don't pay me for this. We did it, and without a carry, we made $850,000. After a lot of work, we netted $2.2 million, which was our original 1.36 and the 850,000. You do the simple arithmetic there, that's a 4% annual return. Beats a passbook savings account rate, but does not get you into ULI's Hall of Fame. Now, here is where I want us to focus today. This took me a long time to come around to, we in real estate tend to think of ourselves as the entire universe. Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you we're not, that there's larger universes beyond us. This is what I might have done instead with the stock market. Had we, in 2007, taken that $1.36 million and paid our taxes, even in California, highest capital gains rate in the country, 13%, 20% for the feds, so it's 33%. Had we paid 33%, taken our money and put it in an Standard & Poor's S&P 500 index mutual fund, I think you all know what those are, because I kind of know what those are. An index mutual fund is one where you take the 500 largest companies, the S&P 500, you set up a mutual fund that exactly mirrors each of those companies' market capitalization in the S&P. So if Apple is 5% of the S&P and Google is 10% or whatever, the mutual fund exactly mirrors that. So you are buying a basket that exactly mirrors how the S&P as a whole performs. Had we done that, we would have netted $2,070,000, almost an identical amount of money, almost an identical amount to the amount we made 2.2. But how do we make 2.2? We took a lot of risk. We did a lot of work. We probably spent 100 hours. It's a long drive from San Francisco to Weed. 100 hours developing this property. We borrowed $3.5 million. We had to personally guarantee that. We took the risk on the construction, and of course we took the risk on the sale. Now the clever among you will say, well, wait a second, had you done this, had you sold your property, hold my calls please. Had we sold the property and put it in the stock market, we would have been taking a stock market risk. Absolutely true. Stock market, particularly an individual stock or any individual stock in the short term, is laden with risk. You all know that. But the market taken as a whole and taken over a long period of time has been amazingly consistent in its returns. You see here, over the 11-year period that we were talking about, it was just under, what's that? It's just under 11% annual return. You know, they tell you, if you go to a presentation, 20 minutes, half an hour, you're only going to remember one or two things. So try to focus on the important. Here's a hint. This is the thing to remember from today's talk. The stock market has produced a 9% compounded return for the last 90 years. 9% compounded return. So if we focus on this, if you take your money and you pay, if you trade, and let's go back to Walgreens. If you trade into that Walgreens and get a 5% return on your $2.2 million, all you need, assuming a 25% tax rate, all you need to do in the stock market with after-tax money is, I'll tell you the answer, it's 6.6%. In other words, you take $100, take 25 off, 6.6% on 75, the after-tax dollars, is the same as 5% on 100. 90 years. This has been an amazing revelation to us. Let me just make sure I'm not... This, of course, this works in California. California has the highest tax rate in the country. New York and maybe here in Massachusetts also has, but California has a 13% tax. This works a whole hell of a lot better if you're in Nevada or Texas or Washington State, a state where there is no income tax, where you're only paying 20%. And this is not an idle comparison. The sage of Omaha, Warren Buffett swears, is absolutely confident that the stock market, which is around 25,000 right now, is going to go to 1 million. and that's kind of boggling. But the million means that the stock market only has to double another 6 times. If it does that, what I'm here to tell you is you'd be better off putting your money in the stock market, paying your taxes, having absolute liquidity, and not worrying about leaky roofs or what that tenant, what Walgreens, which is notorious for this, what it's going to do to you when the lease option comes around. And you don't have to worry about what the residual value of your land is going to be at the end of Walgreens' lease. If drones are suddenly delivering all of our prescriptions, Walgreens may be out of business. And I can tell you, and I think, we have any bankers here? Because I'd like a nod or two. There's a banker. My general impression over the last 35 years in this are bankers are far more impressed with actual cash than claims of equity. If you have $10,000 in a Fidelity account, they like that a whole lot better than $100,000 that you claim to have equity in an LLC. Nod? Yes? No? Okay, I got a big nod back there. Thank you. Audience participation. Now, there's a reason we're in real estate. I just did the stock market versus real estate comparison against a bad trade. Now we're going to do it against a very good trade, and you'll see what happens. At the beginning of this year, when we sold this property, my partners and I thought about it, and we decided, what the hell, we'll try again. I'll be honest with you, we have not had great luck. We're very cautious, we're conservative, have not had great luck doing 1031 exchanges. The time limitations, it's hard to find good properties. But because we're in retail, because we know that all of the stories about the demise of retail are a lot of bunk, because we know that a supermarket or drugstore anchored shopping center is still a great investment, we thought, hey, maybe there's a chance, maybe we can find a decent shopping center, a solid performer with a good return at a fair price. So we put the money into an exchange, and we went out and looked for it. And sure enough, we were able to find a highly competition-constrained shopping center on the Highway 1 corridor at an 8.3 cap. This slide is accurate, except it's simplified. It's involved a couple more trades. But the cap rate, the 8.3 cap rate on the shopping center, the debt level, that's 70% in debt, the interest rate, 4.8. These are all accurate numbers. What this produced, and this is really good, is a 16% cash-on-cash return on the $2.2 million. That is a heck of a good deal for just a solid deal. There was no upside in it. It was a 100% lease center. It was just a good deal to roll into. Compare that back to the stock market. Had we taken the $2.2 million, invested the 33%, paid the 33% in taxes, then invested the balance in the stock market, and then the Sage of Omaha proved correct, that is, it continues at 9%, we would have made $133,000 a year. That's a great return, but it's about a third of what we were doing or what we were able to do with the shopping center. 9% cash on cash here, but back to the 2.2, it's only 6%. But that goes back to my earlier point, comparing the sale here against a bad trade, that the 6% return here still beats trading into a Walgreens or any other asset that has a long-term low yield fixed. So, the big picture, if you can do a development deal, if you can invest $1 million in a deal and make 2, and then trade into the next one, take 2 and make 4, you should be trading every day of the week. You should be trading until the cows come home. But if you're going to trade into a weak deal, particularly a long-term, low-yield deal, then you should be trading up. If you're going to trade into a weak deal, I wouldn't do it. The problem with trading into one good deal after another, as I alluded to, it's very hard to find good deals. In 35 years of doing this, we have not once, not one single time, have we sold one property and then found a development deal in the next 45 days. That just hasn't worked for us. What we have managed to do over the last 10 years, I counted it up, we attempted 7 trades. 7 separate trades we attempted, only 2 of them worked. In other words, we put the money into an exchange account after the sale. We went out, looked for trade property. 5 times we decided no, we weren't going to do it. Why? Because either the properties were overpriced or they were just snake bitten with risk. We decided it wasn't worth it, that we'd rather pay our taxes. And when we did manage to trade, it was like this weed project. It was into long-term dirt. One trade we did because we already had a development deal teed up. It had been in the shop for months. And so when we sold the other property, we were able to roll into the trade, but having had enough time to solve all the problems. And then finally, and I counted this up, we've had 3 in the course of 35 years, trades like the shopping center that I just mentioned, where we just traded into a solid performer. We knew we weren't going to hit a home run with it, but it was a great way to, let's just say, defer our taxes and expand our cash flow. So my advice is, if you can stumble across a fair deal in 45 days, the 1031 is really your best friend. But before you pull the trigger on a weak deal, before you buy that Walgreens on the wrong corner in the wrong town in South Dakota, you might consider paying your taxes and expanding your investment horizons. And the bigger picture, and for those of you who've heard me talk before, I always talk about specialization, how in your day job as a real estate developer, how important it is to specialize. I absolutely believe that. But once you get some momentum going, once you start to have a little bit of net worth, then you need to diversify. Like I said, we are highly specialized, very concentrated in neighborhood shopping centers. That's pretty much all we do. But over the years, we've managed to diversify our holdings into urban office, small buildings, and high-end residential, also small, and of course, the liquidity that I'm talking about in the stock market. Diversification is your best friend. You know, actually, I was thinking about this on the plane out. Ideally, you would like your financial portfolio to fly like a 747. If each of your financial engines, if they're separate, if you have stock holdings, if you have real estate, if you have others, you'd like to be able to lose one engine or even 2 engines and still land the plane safely. Liquidity is also one of your best friends. Nothing solves a problem, and nothing solves a real estate developer's problem like a little bit of liquidity. The earth is 71% water, 71% liquid. I don't think a real estate developer is ever going to get that far, but that, I think, is what we should aspire to, liquidity. And now I'm going to be open for questions and answers. And I like to end these things with saying, everybody in this room is far luckier than 99% of the people on the planet. You know, we've all been dealt great hands, and the way to kind of thank God or Darwin or whoever you believe in is to give back, not just writing checks, but give back with your time to those less fortunate. Happy to answer questions. That's the presentation, folks. The question is, how do you stop doing the exchanges? The only way that you there's a really good solution, but no developers seem to embrace it. The way you kind of stop finally is you die. You get a step up in basis when you die. Otherwise, what happens if you do trade after trade after trade? I talked about having a 0 basis, with neither negative nor positive. If you keep doing trades, what ends up happening is you have an enormously negative basis. So let's say that property that I talked about at $5.5 million, let's say our basis was a negative $3 million, so that the gain would be based on 8. Well, you get to a point where you cannot sell, you have to trade. That's a difficult situation. And again, the only solution is the unhappy when you die. Or you just say, you tell your kids, here's an asset that we cannot ever possibly sell. There's got to be a trade. Next question. The question is the reverse exchange. I'm glad somebody asked that. If you understand a reverse exchange and you have the ability to do one, then you don't need to be in this class. The reverse exchange is what I call the rich guy exchange. They work great. The problem with a reverse exchange is you need to have all the money in hand, in your pocket, to buy the second property. So in the reverse exchange, you go out. In our case, you buy that shopping center for $7.3 million, and then you sell the weed property after. So you need whatever, let's say you needed $2.5 million to buy that, and then you sell the weed property and you replace the capital. It works great. It's not a particularly useful strategy for somebody just starting out unless he or she picked his parents or her parents really well, because it requires a lot of cash. But we have done reverses, and they work great. They're just capital constrained. So the question was, it doesn't need to be a 1031 exchange. The question was, do we couple 1031 exchange with cost segregation studies? And the answer is yes, but let's just uncouple the two. A cost segregation study, I'll get my accountant in the back there, is a great way, particularly since I think Trump helped us with the most recent tax bill. A segregation study, what it does, I think you have still a 39.5-year depreciable life. If you buy a shopping center or an office building or apartment building, you depreciate it over 39.5 years. If you spend about $10,000 on that guy in the back, the accountant, he'll do a segregation study for you that will say, okay, your HVAC equipment will last 5 years. You can write it up. You're segregating each of the items. Your roof will last 10 years. Each item will last. And what ends up happening is you get to depreciate an enormous amount in the first year or two. So the answer is, I think, yes. If you're of the belief that if the government is going to give it to you, you ought to take it, then I think you're a fool not to do a segregation study. You get an amazing write-off in the first couple of years. But that leads back to your point. You end up with a significant negative basis pretty quickly. But yes, we do segregation studies. That shopping center that we just acquired, we're doing a segregation study on right now. I think it's good practice. So the question, all right, so you all know what a real estate investment trust is. It's a REIT. One way that, back to your question, which I suppose I could have thought of, one way that you stop and get out when you say, no mas, I don't want to develop anymore, but I've got all these assets with these wickedly low bases, is you go to a REIT. In my world, that would probably be Regency Centers. You go to a big, well-thought-of REIT, and you say, I have this portfolio of 10 shopping centers, or I have this portfolio of apartment buildings. I would like to trade, and how this works as a trade, I don't know, but it's legal. I would like to trade my real estate portfolio for shares in your REIT. It's called upreating, and what you end up with, so you give your $10 million worth of property in exchange for $10 million worth of shares in this company. I thought about it briefly and said, well, that could work, but I think we do a better job owning our own property and managing our own property than this REIT. And I don't know that Robert, who's the president of this REIT, is going to be the president in 5 years. And I don't know what's going to happen. So, Scott, we've never given that any serious consideration. The question was, do I want to talk about charitable remainder trusts, talking about exits? The answer is no. Honestly, I don't know anything about charitable remainder trusts. So this gentleman just clarified my layman's understanding. You actually, when you do an UPREIT, you get units of partnership. But as far as I know, they walk, talk, and quack like a duck. I mean, they act more or less the same as shares of stock. Is that?
Well, they're not shares of stock. It's a unit.
Yes, I understand.
Unit. Until you convert it to stock, it's not taxable.
Right.
You wouldn't convert it to stock until you're ready to sell it.
Got it.
At that moment in time, it becomes taxable.
Right. So I guess the trick is then you wait until you die. And then you get... Dying solves so many problems. Anybody? All right. Well then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this presentation.